It was all a bit dismal, what was being offered by Labour. I think this election lacks hope.
If you want a message of hope, why is your best argument, oh, well, don't worry, you're going to get a Labour government so you can vote for us just because we're not Labour.
Because
that
we'll push them to do this thing,
hope.
to bring some hope.
Hope is showing how you're going to do that.
Watching you argue with Sian, you could be a Conservative.
Ooh,
telling her,
I beg your pardon.
She's wildly unrealistic. And
Andrew Neil says similar things to
Whoa.
On this podcast, we also like to discuss what is basically not being mentioned in the election. And the big one in 2024, bizarrely, is Brexit. Hello and welcome to the Political Fourcast. Labour have launched their manifesto with just two things on the cover, a picture of Keir Starmer and the word change, promising to somehow find enough economic growth to transform the UK. But how much change are they actually offering? The big vision, when you get to reading it, is about ending the chaos and hope. Not big change on inequality, poverty, productivity, climate change, or our place in the world. Labour is on course to win power with a safety-first strategy that promises relatively little, leaving us relatively little to hold them to account for. But will that be enough for the country? And what about the thing the 2019 election did actually promise and deliver, Brexit? The big issue at the last election, this time in the Labour manifesto, is buried on page 117. With me today, Labour's Stella Creasy, the Green Party's Sian Berry, and our very own senior political correspondent, Paul McNamarra. So Stella, I'm sure you're going to banish my scepticism and tell me how you're going to change the world with this manifesto. It strikes me as it's kind of big talk of change, but when you get to the specifics, it's pretty vague.
Well, maybe it's a sign of the times, but I do think it would be a change not to be walking into the chamber in Parliament, kind of covering your eyes and hoping for the best because the government is so chaotic and so mad and coming up with things that you think they must be saying for a dare. I mean, I don't think you can undersell for people just how chaotic it has been and the impact it's having on their lives. Anybody who's got a mortgage bill knows the consequences of having a chaotic Conservative government in power. I take your challenge. I take your challenge that the scale of the problems and the things that are broken run so deep, that is going to need big work. But I think it's a luxury to say just having a government that you don't think is bonkers is going to be, isn't a big enough change. Because, you know, when I go out and talk to people, and I suspect you're probably finding this too, there's just this general sense of Westminster being so awful and so beyond reproach that governments can never do anything good. So to actually win the argument that governments could do anything good at all seems the first step. You know,
the end to the chaos narrative works with a lot of voters, but I wonder whether it really works beyond day two. You know, once you've got rid of them and you're the new government and you don't have, you know, a huge programme of like, we're going to do this, that, and the other. I am
going to push back that I just think the destabilising effect of government especially over the last 5 years, has been really damaging for a lot of people, very much at the sharp end, right? I take your point that in the context of people used to governments that come up with things like Brexit and how to respond to Ukraine and the pandemic, that doesn't feel as radical. But maybe going back to the sense that actually you plan for change rather than having change foisted upon you is the most radical thing of all.
I mean, Sian, of course, your party wants much more radical change in all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether actually the challenge for you in all of this is that their genius has been actually not promising radical change. You know, and they will get elected in all likelihood not promising very much.
Well, this is it. This is a very narrow political bubble argument that we just heard. You know, the idea that people are only worried about there not being chaos in Westminster when their daily lives have been affected for 14 years by the most severe austerity, the changes in the economy that have hurt their incomes, the fact that the benefit system is so punitive now. And we've now got Labour coming in, promising to be more sensible, granted, but writing a 5-year programme that promises not to do very much. It's not just that it's not promising very much. There is a lot in there that says there are cast iron rules that we will not reverse austerity, for example. And to see change in their daily lives, people are going to get very impatient quite quickly with the new Labour government. And they're going to start challenging and saying, can we not have a bit more than this?
Well, if you get elected not promising very much, then you can't be held.
Promising
you
not
can't be
to
held
do very
up.
much is different to not promising.
But you won't be accused of breaking your promises if you haven't promised very much. And the question is, does that last, or will people, as you suggest, start getting disgruntled?
Well, no, it doesn't last. I mean, one of the first things that Green MPs are going to do is take our manifesto, which has costed plans to reinvest in the National Health Service to a huge degree, to put money back into teachers' pay, the education service, to restore benefits, to do a massive uplift on universal credit and disability benefits, because that's what's really hurting people. We've got a costed plan for that. Labour are saying they will not do that. So we're going to have a big job on our hands. Greens working with the civil society and all the people who need this to try and reverse Labour's strong commitments not to spend money.
Can we just get into that? Because actually what you're talking about is borrowing a horrific amount of money in order to do that, which is what Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss did.
You are talking about borrowing. Ours are tax, ours are revenue.
You've put borrowing in your manifesto as well, haven't you?
There is borrowing, mainly for capital investment.
No,
you put
borrowing, right? But that's also what Rishi Sunak and
they were borrowing for tax cuts, which is
quite
borrowing.
Different. You are borrowing. It's the borrowing.
Yeah, but you will borrow. Every government borrows loads. You will end up borrowing billions. The numbers will all be on.
What I won't do, because every election is a choice, is take the idea that it's a given that we're going to win, and so therefore this is about attacking without the accountability and scrutiny of what you're talking about, because the people at the poorest at the sharp end, I represented, and I hope to represent again, one of the poorest communities in this country, and every single change has cost them directly, right? So adding in another catastrophic change like that, where you crash the economy again, will not help them.
Right, Paul, we don't have a Conservative on this panel today.
Because I'm wearing blue today, you just thought I could do the job.
No, well, I thought you could tell us what the Conservatives are saying, because we saw something really interesting this week, which is Conservatives, and we're told actually sent out by the campaign to start warning about the danger of a massive Labour majority. What's going on there?
This is the, in case of emergency, break glass, everything's going to the walls. This is the last chance saloon. This is the strategy that you cling on to. And the fear-mongering you put out is, look, the polls are saying that we're not just going to lose, we're going to lose really big. Losing really big would be really bad because Labour would have this whopping great big majority. No one's going to be there to hold them to account. So, don't do that. Don't be tempted with reform. Don't flirt with reform. Stick to the Tory party, because otherwise there'll be no one to keep Labour in check. The problem with that is it sort of falls on its face when a lot of the people that you're talking to there who might be flirting with reform, their argument is they look at Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak and say, well, they're pretty much the same person. The one criticism that's come forward is that they're both so similar. So I'm not scared of the bloke who's really similar to the bloke I don't like having a really big majority. I might as well go for Nigel Farage.
Kashan, the whole keeping the Labour Party in check argument is also yours, but from the other side.
Well, absolutely.
You're saying you want to keep them radical, and the Tories are saying they want to, they want to hold them back. Being too radical.
Yeah, and we are expecting a very large Labour majority here, and there is going to have to be somebody holding them to account. And that's what Greens...
you've got the Tory line. That's the Tory line.
That's what Greens are really good at. Well, the nightmare for the country is if it's only the Conservatives and Reform holding Labour to account, because that's just going to push them even further to the right. We do need Greens there to push them on actually investing in the country, to ask them why we're not seeing the reversal of austerity that we want, to speak maybe on behalf of the councils all around the country, run by all the different parties who are crying out for more investment that are not getting that currently in the plans that have been put forward today.
Doesn't part of you, if we weren't in an election, see Sian really as a kindred spirit? And that you are basically in the same church. It would be quite a good thing to have some people to the left of you in the House.
What Sian's just said is frankly deeply insulting to people like myself who have disagreed with every Labour leader in my lifetime on something, right? And I joined early on. They'll all tell you I've wound them up about something, and I've campaigned for all of them. I didn't join a cult. I joined a political movement. There are plenty of people within the Labour movement who do disagree on all sorts of things. We have debates, we have discussions.
Fewer and fewer, they're all being drummed out.
And I am somebody who has taken that, actually, for 14 years I've served in Parliament. In all that time I've been on the opposition benches. That hasn't stopped us from campaigning on issues and frankly winning those arguments. If your best argument for being elected is, well, we're not the other guys, that isn't a contribution to make.
Well,
that's an opposition.
That is the argument you're making. That's entirely the argument that you're making.
No. I'm doing the reverse. I'm saying that actually it's about what you do stand for, what you will do, what you are going to champion.
I mean, I want to stress how much the Greens will be a constructive opposition to the Labour Party, and how much we would like to be working with the Labour. How much we would like to be working with the Labour backbench to push forwards the good ideas that are in our manifesto. There's a strong economic case for a lot of the things that are there that we've worked out that we want to be putting forwards to the Labour leadership. Now, the thing about the Labour backbenchers, they will still be whipped. If there are questions like, is there too much privatisation still going on within the NHS? And you've got Wes Streeting pushing through stuff. There are going to be limits to what Labour MPs can do. And we've seen a really worrying authoritarian streak from Keir Starmer recently.
You guys are doing a great job for me as the proxy for the Tories. I'm just going to let you two shout it out. This is great. The proxy for the Tories doesn't have to do anything.
Well, if they were here, I'd say the same. Like, all of us have to be challenged.
If they were here, they'd let you two carry on arguing.
Why?
No, the thing is,
why? Because they're out of ideas.
Well,
I mean, that is the thing. The Conservatives are not really providing.
It's interesting. I mean, I was thinking a similar thing, but from the other angle, which was that watching you argue with Sian, you could be a Conservative.
Ooh,
telling her,
I beg your pardon.
She's wildly unrealistic. And
Andrew Neil says similar things to that.
Whoa. Like, Nye Bevan, pure but impotent, is written through my soul, okay? That is the fundamental.
I'm not accusing you of being a Conservative, but I'm just saying that the role in that,
I'm not going to
dynamic in that
the
argument.
idea that the Greens somehow are a progressive movement, and we're not. Like, actually, what is progressive politics? I understand is up for contestation, but many of us consider ourselves, frankly, to be much more radical.
On this podcast, we also like to discuss what is basically not being mentioned in the election. And the big one in 2024, bizarrely, is Brexit. Paul, nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah, no, the Lib
kind
Dem
of for obvious reasons.
Yeah, Lib Dem manifesto, the pro-Europe party. It was on page 112, and it's their long-term ambition. Labour Party manifesto today, it's on page 117. Your manifesto didn't even make it in there.
No, it is.
It's in the long form policy.
No,
but
it's in the manifesto.
The thing that I was handed out yesterday at your launch.
It's not part of the short summary version. You're right, but there's some really good stuff
it's quite
in
a big
the main
thing.
manifesto, and it's not that far down either.
But given it's the one thing that happened since 2019 that was promised at the last election. It is weird.
It is politically toxic, though. And you go...
That's not true.
Go around...
Look at the polling data. The public get that Brexit has not worked out in any way like it was promised to. It's not delivering any benefits to people.
But they don't actually want to talk about it.
They don't want, and I agree with them, they don't want another referendum. Look how divisive and toxic that was. And that goes beyond... I mean, I think we can all agree on the doorstep people at the moment are very hostile because we've now got this political culture that is... very hostile. That wasn't just Brexit alone. We could see it coming with the SNP and the independence referendum, but that has now seeped online and offline, I think, into our politics. The idea that you're angry first and then you ask a question rather than the other way around.
Do you think, Stella, that the Lib Dem position, really, which is going back into the single market, is going to be an argument we have over the next 10 years?
No, and I sit here as chair of the Labour Movement for Europe, so I spend a lot of my time talking to people in Europe and talking to people in the Labour movement about what is possible. We should never underestimate how much damage we have done to our standing and to people's time and effort and patience with us on the international stage through Brexit. I would say it's like we were that awful man your aunt was married to for 20 years and you put up with him at Christmas and then finally she divorces him. You're not going to immediately go, no, come round, it's all fine, all forgiven.
So why isn't Labour talking about that?
Well, we are.
In your manifesto?
We are. And what I would say is that there is a window of opportunity, right? Because a lot of businesses are looking at the economy and deciding whether to invest. Brexit was never going to be a big bang. It's about long-term decisions. Do you site your plant here? Do you bother to train people up? Or do you go to Belgium or France or Italy? There is a window of opportunity in which if we can have conversations with Europe about trade, about security, about our economy, about our climate, we can do something. But it has to work for them as well. And that's the thing people don't really talk about in these debates. We talk about Brexit like it's just happened here, like it happened there as well.
But isn't this an odd way to treat the public? I mean, all the polling suggests there is buyer's remorse on Brexit.
Yeah.
Over 1 million people who voted for Brexit are now dead.
Can I just say I really hate that argument as somebody. Like,
it's just
that feels
true.
Really
it's just a fact.
Yeah, but these are people's relatives. Let's not be. Let's not be
what
cruel.
I'm saying is that demographically, I'm not being cruel. I'm just saying demographically, there is a change in the population in terms of the argument. And if you held a referendum tomorrow, the indications are it would go a different way.
We did leave,
not
right?
to have a conversation about this is very weird.
Right, but you have to have a conversation about, I say, what you can do now in that window. I sit here as the chair of the Labour movement saying, actually, treaty renegotiation is a 7 to 10 year process. Those businesses, those British jobs haven't got that long.
Sian, what do you think the conversation around Brexit should be?
We know that Brexit has done an enormous amount of damage to our economy. We know that it's damaged the lives of many, many people. We are seeing so much suffering that we have to start talking about which aspects of being outside the European Union we want to start to fix. And that could be the customs union, which is the massive amount of friction there is for business at the moment, the thing that's really hurting supplies of various things. We're so used to seeing gaps on the supermarket shelves now, or in the chemists, and it's that's a real problem. But also we've got the single market, which is a real problem for people wanting to export goods, and then we've got freedom of movement, which just breaks my heart on a daily basis. All of those things need some kind of greater alignment, and that's what we talk about in our manifesto. But also we're trying to get ready to potentially rejoin at some point, and we're the only party willing to put that word into our manifesto. That is a debate we need to start having with people. I understand what you say about the hostility and the fact that just mentioning it to some people will set them off. We're all nervous in this election of setting off Nigel Farage. If we start talking about it, he'll suddenly be on every single programme. But it is something that we shouldn't be scared to talk about. The country, if you ask them in opinion polls, they do want to rejoin. They do feel like we've lost something, and we should be having that sensible conversation during some time in the next 5 years. And I don't like that Keir Starmer seems to want to rule that out, although it's one of the things I think he can be persuaded of.
Okay, we can't have the conversations of 2016 and 2019 because Europe has moved on. I mean, Europe is talking, for example, about a youth mobility scheme. I think there is a really interesting piece of work. I don't think what they came up with.
But why don't you want to start a conversation about rejoining? It's really interesting that you don't.
I've just said, because it would take that is treaty negotiation. Talk to the Ukrainians, right? They are on a fast track, and that's a 7 to 10 year process. Our economy, our communities, our security doesn't have that long. Far better to look at what we can do now to also rebuild trust with our European partners. Do you think they've been sitting around waiting for us to talk about Brexit? No, they've got real challenges. We haven't talked about the European elections and the fact that the far right, if the far right could get its act together, it'd be the second largest party now in the European Parliament, and it would be negotiating with the European Parliament. So some respect for the fact that we are asking countries who've had to put up with us being a destructive, divisive force under Boris Johnson and Liz Truss went to Europe and said she didn't know whether the French were friend or foe. Do we think that people in Europe don't read our newspapers or see our debate? We have a lot of work to do. And in the middle of all of that, our British businesses facing massive increases in paperwork, massive increases in cost. That's my priority right now.
Well, Sian, I mean,
these are not
you mentioned the European
things,
elections.
Yeah.
We also look at the rise of reform in this country. And you mentioned it yourself. If Brexit became part of the debate, Nigel Farage would be centre stage in every argument.
Yeah.
The point of that being,
good. Let's hold him to account for what he's done.
There's a really
sizable,
or there's a really strong minority of people who feel extremely strongly about not going anywhere near the European Union, isn't there? So I mean, you're sort of let's start the conversation.
Yeah, I think
would be hated by a pretty vocal minority.
I think that's true, and it's a debate. That's this is why we're not bringing it up during this election, because there's precious little airtime until voting day, and who wants to do that? But it worries me enormously that having achieved Brexit, they're not stopping there, are they? They're upping the ante all of the time. They are really pushing for. I mean, the Rwanda scheme, it just goes way beyond anything that people were talking about at the Brexit during the Brexit debate. The rhetoric against migrants and refugees and all of those things that we worried would happen next if Brexit happened are happening next, and we do need to start pushing back towards something more hopeful.
As the proxy Tory voice here, the Conservatives would be throwing in now that actually the third nation scheme, lots of other European nations are also looking at that. So it's not just something that the Conservative government is looking at, other nations in Europe are.
Only Belarus looked to leave the European Court of Human Rights. I mourn the loss of the libertarian wing of the Conservative movement that used to recognise that the reason why Churchill wanted us to be part of that body was that overbearing governments could affect citizens' rights. So having an independent court that was backed up by every country was a way of protecting citizens. But, you know, I actually am talking about, but I'm very proud to be the chair of the Labour Movement for Europe. We've got over 55 candidates who are Labour Movement for Europe candidates who are out there campaigning. You know, actually, we are having a party debate about what that could be, but we're just focused on what you can actually do now.
So does it just ultimately come down to you now for pragmatism over principle?
No, pragmatism is the principle in this instance. Do you want me to tell the businesses in my constituency who are about to go bust because they can't afford all the extra costs, wait 10 years for treaty negotiation? Or actually, can we do a deal in 18 months that might involve the Pan-European Mediterranean Convention? Seriously, look it up. It's great. You know, that would help reduce the challenges around rules of origins. Pure but impotent, Nye Bevan makes a real difference to your politics. Because actually, all that hostility on the ground is people going, I don't believe a word of you because you couldn't do anything different anyway. What if the difference is actually making things happen?
Does part of you not fear, though, that there is a danger of 5 years of pragmatic government that is calm, that does change things, but in a relatively modest way, paving the way for what we're seeing in America now, which is the resurgence of the right? And
you're
in 5 years'
comparing not
time,
crashing the economy with Donald Trump.
Well, yeah, I'm comparing you to Biden, and I'm saying if you are, I mean, Biden without the money, by the way, because Biden's been able to spend a huge amount of money on the Inflation Reduction Act and other measures, which you won't be able to. And despite all of that, the right is resurgent and looking like it might win the election.
So
Does that not worry you?
I do not underestimate the scale of the challenge caused by the rise of far-right extremist politics around the world. I look at the National Rally in France and Macron's decision to call an election in the run-up to the Olympics. I look at the AfD, I look at Geert Wilders, I look at Giorgia Meloni. And yes, I look at the impact it's had on politics, even in countries like Sweden and Denmark. I also look at the socialists winning in Portugal. I look at Donald Tusk. I know that there is an argument that we've all got to have with the British public about what the alternative can be. I just know it also starts with a basic level of competency that government can do things.
You think competence is enough?
I genuinely think...
The bottom line of this conversation is competence
I think
enough?
It's the starting point for the British public because they have no faith that anything can be different. And that's where the populists come in, because ultimately they are sclerotic, right? Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, Geert Wilders, you know, Marine Le Pen and co., they don't offer any answers. They just offer you somebody to blame.
Do you
they
think
offer you the idea that
Sian,
nothing can be different, so just be cross with this group of people for the reason you're in.
Sian, do you think competence is enough?
I don't, and I think you make a really, really good point there. I said earlier that things were, you know, it was all a bit dismal, what was being offered by Labour. I think this election lacks hope. They should be putting more hope into their election campaigning. And at the end of 5 years, they need to have built more that people cherish, or it does end up at the end of 5 years being something that could just melt away again. We've got to be building much more quickly, in a much more concerted way, a better country, and building back our institutions like the NHS into a genuinely properly invested in public institution that people will never, ever let slip again, because at the moment the NHS is absolutely teetering on the edge, and nothing I see in Labour's plans. There's a single-digit amount of billions of pounds going into the NHS in Labour's current revenue plans. We've upped that to 50 billion by the end of the 5 years. That's the real hope people want to see. That's the kind of thing that people want to have seen built by the end of 5 years.
They
won't want to let go of.
Sorry, but if you want a message of hope, why is your best argument, oh, well, don't worry, you're going to get a Labour government so you can vote for us just because we're not Labour.
Because we'll push them to do this thing, to bring some hope.
Hope is showing how you're going to do that. So
Parliament.
People, where have you been on Europe? With the greatest will in the world, those of us who challenged the retained EU law and worked with the trade unions and worked with the campaign organisations, where were you?
On Brexit, when Brexit was going through, and Caroline Lucas was a leading light in trying to coordinate people.
In the last 5 years, when it's been difficult.
Some of those appalling
amendments. When it's been difficult in the last 5 years, where have you guys been? And I had Brexiteer Greens standing
against me. It's much more argumentative than you two than I ever expected, I have to say.
I'm exhausted.
We've been a growing force in politics, particularly local government, for the last 5 years.
Do you
know
detect
it.
any? I mean, what I'm raising in terms of sort of the longer term fear for Labour. Do you detect any of that in the conversations you're having?
Look, the truth of the matter is that as the Conservatives are pumping out now as their last line of defence is we're looking towards this massive majority. It might not be the supermajority, but it is looking like a very large majority. If you look at the vast majority of new candidates that Labour parties bring in, a lot of them have been vetted to within an inch of their lives. You're not looking at an awful lot of dissenting voices within the new people that are coming through. So I don't get the impression that there's going to be hordes of new Labour MPs that are going to be beating down the leader of the opposition. Well, the new Prime Minister's office, if it is Keir Starmer who wins the election, saying, right, we need a second referendum right now. No, I think the status quo is going to be the one that...
Okay.
But if two of your models are either kind of oppositional or silence, there is a space in the middle called debate, discussion, development. There is a, dare I say it, third way on this. And again, it is a bit disrespectful because actually there are lots of new people coming into politics. You know, I say that as somebody who rose with horror that I'm going to end up being a grandee by default, having been elected pre-2015 if I win again. Like, actually, I just don't think that's fair. What's happened is a culture which is sectarian and tribal, and that doesn't help anybody. Let's go back to ideas and arguing about them, and actually within political movements and across Parliament, because that's the best of political process.
What does all this mean then for the long or short range election forecast? Stella, what do you think is going to happen and what have the last couple of days done to it?
Well, I worry that things haven't moved very much because there is this drumbeat from left and right, Greens, Lib Dem, Conservatives, that the election is a foregone conclusion, which for me feels a bit like voter suppression. So actually, however you plan to vote, I really hope people do vote. They've only got a few more days to register. They've only got a few more days to get a postal vote. There really is a big choice at this election, and it really does matter who you vote for at a local level and the things that they will do and the causes that they will pick up. Because if I've learned anything in 14 years, is that the power of ideas is transformative.
Sian, how do you think things are looking?
So what I'm really noticing coming back from people on the doorstep in the last few days is they are starting to think a little bit more about what the character of the next government will be, and it will be a Labour government. So they're looking at the manifesto today, and I think the character that comes across the most clearly from the manifesto, if you look at the pictures in it, is Keir Starmer in fatigues. So, I mean, I think that is, there is going to be this, he's going to win a lot of power. Do they want him to have all the power, or do they want there to be strong and independent opposition voices on the ground, in Parliament, arguing with him, scrutinising him, asking the right questions? They know that Labour MPs won't necessarily be allowed to do that. They know that Greens will, and that does seem to be a big feeling that's coming through to me at the moment.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, hearing these two voices. I mean, Stella comparing the assumption that Labour's going to win to voter suppression. And now imagine a world in which the media commentary, I mean, I know it's very hard to imagine, but imagine a world in which the media commentary is wrong. And gets the predictions wrong.
Does it exactly?
Is there something in this that actually maybe they're not that far ahead?
If you talk to Tory candidates, the feeling and mood among them is that they are way behind and Labour are way ahead. And the events of last week with D-Day and Tory party chairman Rich Holden being parachuted into a constituency has sapped the energy out of many, many Tory candidates. And their mood is moving beyond the result of this election and what the party looks like after this election. And you've seen some manoeuvrings from some senior members of the party who might end up in leadership roles. You've seen grandees going campaigning in seats to help colleagues out, which might engender their help come a leadership race. And I think that what a lot of Tory candidates are talking about now is the race after and what the party looks like then.
We must leave it there with 3 weeks to go. That was the Political Forecast. Until next time, bye-bye.